And welcome to Line in the Sand with Luke and Doc. It is Tuesday, December 22nd, 2009. My name is Luke. Doc is here with us as usual. How you doing today, Doc?
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. I'm so excited about tonight's show. It's just going to be amazing. As you know, we have Lord Christopher Monckton with us, and I'll let you take it away from there, huh, my friend?
Very good, my friend. We're in the tailwinds of the Copenhagen Climate Conference. The tailwinds have just about settled down, and we are honored and pleased to have Lord Monckton with us today. Lord Monckton, how are you, sir?
Well, hello, Luke, and hello, Doc. Very nice to be with you both.
Great. Lord Monckton, I'm just going to give a little bio on you. Lord Christopher Monckton, 3rd Viscount Monckton of Benchley, is a British politician, business consultant, policy advisor, writer, columnist, inventor, and hereditary peer. He served as an advisor to Margaret Thatcher's policy unit in the 1980s and invented the eternity puzzle at the end of the 1990s. More recently, though, he has attracted controversy for his public opposition to the mainstream scientific consensus on climate change, and that is why he is with us today. Good afternoon, America, and good evening, Malaysia. How are you today, sir?
Are you on one knee? Are you touching your forelock? Are you wearing white gloves?
Yes, I am, sir.
I don't believe a word of it.
Lord Monckton, can you give us a backdrop on what happened in Copenhagen?
Well, I'm glad to say that almost nothing happened in Copenhagen. What might have been a plot by the bureaucratic class worldwide to establish a world government using the supposed threat to the climate as a Trojan horse failed lamentably and spectacularly. And indeed, the moment Al Gore arrived, it began snowing, so the Gore effect is working overtime. And at the end of the conference, when the whole thing collapsed in farce, the biggest snowstorm to hit Europe and North America for many years, and in Washington, D.C. ever, duly descended to remind people that the Almighty has a sense of humor and that the human effect on climate is simply negligible, which is why we can't stop these very big cold spells from happening from time to time. So I think what was good about Copenhagen is that the world bureaucratic class, the governing class, had tried to get together in a kind of conspiracy against the governed. It was the governors against the governed, it was the rich against the poor, it was the strong against the weak, the big guy against you and me, the little guy, Luke and Doc and Monckton, there we all were. We were the little guys. They were going to try to put their hand in our trouser pocket and help themselves to our cash. They were going to take over our constitutions and replace democracy with a kind of world tyranny, all in the name of saving us from ourselves, because we in the democratic, prosperous West had been, so it was said, responsible for the climate debt we had built up by burning fossil fuels, which in turn were causing the climate to boil. That was the storyline. That was what was written into the original draft of the Treaty of Copenhagen, as it was supposed to be, a copy of which I got hold of in October of this year, and I made a certain amount of fuss about it at that time. As a result, I'm glad to say that programs such as yourselves and many others told their viewers and their listeners to get in touch with their senators and tell them the Treaty of Copenhagen shall not pass. And so many hundreds of thousands did that the Senate was, the switchboard was practically melting with the number of calls they were getting. And of course, the word of that got back to Obama and also to the people at the UN who had for 25 years been plotting the world government they hoped to put in place at Copenhagen. And so they realized that the game was up. People were now watching them. They couldn't get away with that. So on the first day, they withdrew that poisonous earlier draft and replaced it with a much shorter draft in which there was no longer any mention of a treaty, no longer any mention of any binding obligations on any nation, and no longer any specific mention of world government, though there were still many hundreds of interlocking new bureaucracies which you and I would have to pay for. However, gradually, as the 2 weeks wore on, more and more of these new governmental-style centralized bureaucracies were struck out of the draft, and eventually a really short document was all we ended up with, and that document simply said they were going to create 2 or 3 new bureaucracies, which were going to be pretty expensive. It's going to cost us tens of billions and eventually hundreds of billions in the West to pay even for what little they have done so far, unless we can stop it. But the main thing is that their attempt at grabbing worldwide domination by a sort of stealthy bureaucratic coup d'etat under the cover of supposed concern about the imagined and indeed imaginary threat to the climate from global warming caused by us, that has failed and failed spectacularly. And all the environmental movement and the Marxists and their friends and the people who waved red flags with hammers and sickles on them outside the Copenhagen Parliament during the climate conference, all of the left are very upset that they didn't get away with what they had hoped to get away with. But I myself am delighted, and I should like to say thank you to all those in particular, of the American public who are listening, because it was you and your willingness to get in touch with your representatives and let them know what you think about this that helped to save us from what could so easily have been the imposition of quite an unpleasant worldwide dictatorship over us.
Well, Lord Monckton, I have to say thank you, because it was your inspiring speech here in America that really got the ball rolling. Now, I have to ask you this two-part question. Did you ever get a chance to debate Al Gore or David Suzuki? And when I was studying up on you, I noticed this neat term that you coined. Can you tell our listeners, who the bedwetters are?
Right. Let's start with Al Gore and David Suzuki. I issued a written challenge to Al Gore, which was delivered on parchment to his carbon-emitting, electricity-guzzling home in Tennessee, and that was 3 years ago, and I have had no reply. So I guess that he is running scared. So Al, baby, if you're listening to this, I'm coming after you, and I'm going to get you. It's no good you're going around the world charging $300,000 a throw to go on telling your lies. For as long as you refuse to debate with me, nobody is going to believe you anymore. There he is, running scared of just an ordinary peer of the realm. I mean, it's ridiculous when you think about it. David Suzuki, likewise, was offered the chance to debate with me on Canadian radio. The leading talk show host in Canada, Roy Green, offered him the chance a year ago. He ran 5 miles rather than meet anybody who actually knows anything about the subject. And he ordered one of his PR executives, his paid lackeys, to do it instead. And on that PR executive's own admission on his rather silly website, he admitted that he had been creamed. So, of course, these people run a mile. Why? Not because I'm cleverer than they am, but because they know perfectly well I'm going to tell the truth and they're not, and I'll catch them out. That's what they're frightened of. And that's why none of the scientific community, Hansen, issued a challenge. He said, I will debate any skeptic. So immediately several people said, right, Monckton is willing to debate you, and he collapsed and retreated straight away. He's the guy at NASA who first said that global temperatures would rise by some enormous amount over the 20 years, 1998 to 2008, and 1988 to 2008, I should say. And again, it didn't happen. He got the forecast completely wrong, and indeed, on the 20th anniversary of that forecast, in the month of June 2008, it was actually colder worldwide than it had been in June 1988. Did any one of the sycophantic journalists who questioned Hansen about this bother to raise that point? No, they didn't. It's not just that they don't do their homework, it's that they're so flagrantly biased that they will not print anything that points against this now collapsing global warming scare. So the journalists won't print the truth. Al Gore, David Suzuki, James Hansen, all of that sort won't debate with me. And so what do I call these people? These people who pretend that we have a problem and wring their hands and burst into tears. I call them bedwetters, because that's what they are. They're like small children frightened of things in the dark, and they've managed to scare themselves with their own propaganda, though they haven't really succeeded in scaring anybody else, except, arguably, the world's school children who are being taught by dopey teachers that global warming is the worst thing that's ever going to happen to them, and it's going to wreck their generation unless we shut down all the industries of the West. So I do think it is unspeakable that children should be propagandized by these bedwetters. I'll clear my throat. Ask another question.
Speaking of debate and telling the truth, let's talk about the ClimateGate emails a little bit and the science of global warming and this supposed consensus. Why is it so important, and what is being excluded from the debate? And should there even be climate talks at all?
No, there should be no climate talks at all. There is no problem with the climate. We know this now, and I'm going to tell you very briefly how we know it, and then I'll come on to ClimateGate. First of all, we know it because we are able to measure directly how much outgoing radiation from the Earth's surface is escaping to space.